Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Listen and Grow Podcast, your go-to LGBTQ plus news, culture, and stories that actually matter. I'm your host, Zachary Randles-Friedman. In today's episode, it's one of those where everything is happening all at once. We've got major legal victory for trans rights that could ripple across the entire United States, a historic ruling out of Europe taking aim at anti-LGBTQ plus laws, a surprising moment in a conservative state where anti-trans legislation completely failed, and a deeply personal story about identity, success, and what happens when your life doesn't match who you really are. We have other stories that I can't wait to tell you about, but we're going to start with the Montana Supreme Court because it's a defining moment. We're starting with a story that feels like a turning point. In a 5-2 decision, the Montana Supreme Court upheld the right of transgender residents to update their birth certificates and driver's license to reflect their identity. Now, on the surface, that might sound administrative. It's not, because what the court said, the language they use could have long-term national impact. Justice Lori McKinnon wrote, "Transgender discrimination is, by its very nature, sex discrimination." That line right there, that's the headline, because it connects transgender rights directly to sex discrimination protections, which are already established in the constitutional law. The court has emphasized something that's easy to overlook. Identification documents are not just a piece of paper. They're access to jobs, to housing, to health care, and access to simply existing in public life without being questioned. And when those documents don't match who you are, every single one of those interactions become harder or even dangerous. This case, Karchik versus the state of Montana, was brought by the ACLU on behalf of 2 trans residents. And it comes at a time when multiple states are actively trying to restrict or eliminate the ability to change gender markers on IDs. So this ruling doesn't just affect Montana. It creates a legal argument rooted in dignity and constitutional protections that could be used elsewhere. And in this moment, that really does matter. Next, we go to Lesbian Visibility Week, the celebration and the reality. Let's shift gears a bit, because alongside the legal battles, there's also space for visibility and community. Lesbian Visibility Week is officially underway, running through April 26th, and this year's focus is health and well-being, which feels incredibly important because while representation has improved in some areas, healthcare disparities are still very real. This week celebrates lesbian, bisexual, queer, and non-binary women, but it also shines a light on the challenge that still exists. We're talking about gaps in medical research, barriers to affirming care, mental health disparities, and just the general experience of being overlooked in systems that weren't built with everyone in mind. There are nearly 100 events happening across the U.S., the U.K., and Canada, including Wellness Wednesday and Queer Women in Sports Day. But honestly, the most important part isn't the events, it's the message. You are seen, you are valid, and you belong here. Whether you're part about it or you're still figuring it out quietly, this week is all about you. So happy Lesbian Visibility Week. Next, we go to Maryland and Nebraska with 2 different paths. So let's talk about what's happening legislatively in the U.S. because the contrast right now is striking. In Maryland, lawmakers are advancing a bill that would expand protections for LGBTQ plus students in public schools. That means stronger anti-discrimination policies, safer environments, and more support for people who are still figuring out who they are. That's progress. Then we look at Nebraska, and something unexpected happened. Despite being a Republican-led state, its 2026 legislative session ended without passing any of the proposed anti-trans bills. 7 bills all failed. These included attempts to restrict gender-affirming health care, allow providers to refuse care based on personal beliefs, ban care for trans youth, limit bathroom access, roll back DEI programs. Even a budget proposal that tried to restrict language around allyship and gender theory had those provisions stripped out before passing. And what does that tell us? It tells us that even in places where you might expect these laws to pass easily, they don't always. There are limits, there are pushbacks, and sometimes even quietly, progress happens. God, we need more good stories like that. Next, Hamish Douglass, Success versus Truth. Now, this next story is one of those on a completely different level. Australian businessman Hamish Douglass, often compared to Warren Buffett, he's known as the Australian Warren Buffett, is opening up and walking away from everything. Money, status, a successful career, a family life from the outside that looked perfect. But behind all of that, he was struggling with his identity, with his sexuality, with the pressure of living a life that didn't actually feel like his own. He described reaching a breaking point, a complete mental and emotional collapse. And honestly, this is something a lot of people don't talk about because success can look like everything. But if it's not aligned with who you actually are, it doesn't hold. He made a choice to come out, to be honest, to rebuild from the ground up. And yeah, there was loss, but there was also something else, freedom. And I think that's why this story resonates, because so many people are still living versions of their lives that do not fully reflect who they are. And stories like this remind us it's never too late to change that. Next, Apple shakeup, Tim Cook steps back. Now let's move into business and tech, because Apple has announced that Tim Cook will step down as CEO later this year and transition into a role of executive chairman. After more than a decade of leading one of the most powerful companies in the world, that's a big shift. Cook, who became CEO after Steve Jobs, has been one of the most visible openly gay leaders in the global business. And his leadership wasn't just about profits. He's been outspoken on issues like privacy, equity, and LGBTQ+ rights. He'll remain involved in shaping Apple's long-term strategy while John Ternus steps in as CEO. And honestly, it marks the end of a major era. Next, music boycott movement is growing. Now to a story blending activism and culture. A movement called No Music for Genocide is gaining serious traction. Over 1,000 artists are now involved, including major names like Bjork, Lorde, and Hayley Williams. The goal, to remove music from streaming platforms in Israel as a protest against the ongoing war in Gaza. And now the movement is expanding its reach, calling for a boycott of Eurovision unless Israel is removed from the competition. This isn't new. Eurovision faced boycotts before, but this level of artist involvement, that's significant. Because when culture shifts, conversations shift with it. Next, European court strikes down Hungary law. Now to Europe, where a major legal decision just came down. The Court of Justice of European Union has struck down Hungary's anti-LGBTQ+ propaganda law. This law, introduced in 2021, banned the discussion or portrayal of LGBTQ identities in content accessible to minors. It is widely criticized as discriminatory and as a violation of EU values. The European Commission took the case to court, backed by multiple member states, and now it's been ruled unlawful. This is being called a historic victory, not just for Hungary, but for LGBTQ rights across the European Union. Next, prison policy rulings, safety concerns. Back in the United States, a federal appeals court has overturned a ruling that had protected incarcerated trans women from being transferred into men's prison. And this one is serious because it raises immediate concerns about safety. The court didn't say protections shouldn't exist, but it did say that its current legal record wasn't strong enough to uphold a broader ruling. So the case is being sent back. And in the meantime, the risk increases. And this is one of those moments where legal nuance has very real human consequences. They need to figure this out quick. A transgender person should not be put in the wrong prison or jail. It's insane. I mean, that's just asking for a huge amount of trouble and anxiety for someone. I hate that. Next, Supreme Court case is religion versus rights. The U.S. Supreme Court is also stepping into another LGBTQ case. This one involves Catholic preschools in Colorado that are seeking access to public funding, despite refusing to accept children with LGBTQ+ parents. They argue that denying them funding violates their religious freedom. And at the same time, the court declined to hear a separate case involving parents who objected to schools using students' chosen names and pronouns. So again, mixed signals, and a reminder that many of these issues are still very much in flux. Next, pop culture war. So let's lighten up for a second, because Sydney Sweeney's cameo in The Devil Wears Prada 2 has apparently been cut. Creative decisions. We'll leave it at that. And Madonna, because of course this is making headlines after her amazing Coachella performance, and not just for the show itself, but because several archival costume pieces used in the performance have gone missing. They're pieces of pop culture history, and she is actively asking for them back. So if you know someone that ended up with a vintage Madonna corset, now would be the time to return it. She is offering a reward, and all you need to do is just email her team at info@maverick2026@gmail.com. Return it, and I bet you no questions will be asked, and you will make Madonna a very happy person. It's her stuff. Like, if you took it, it was an accident, return it. And that's the episode. From major legal victories to ongoing battles, from personal truth to global movements, this is where we are right now. Progress in some places, pushback in others, and a whole lot of stories in between. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to support the show, share it with someone you know that needs to hear it. And also, please leave a comment or a rating for this podcast, because this show matters, and so do you. And I'm Zach Randles, and this is Listen Up. Come on. Thanks.